Hi, guys. Welcome to the Lit Mag Lab podcast. This is Vevna Forrow. Yeah, let's get started. Okay, so previously I had talked about software, programs to use for creating a literary magazine or journal and putting it together. I didn't have a whole bunch of recommendations, just sharing what I know, so if that helped you, that's great, but or pointed you in some direction, I think that's totally awesome. So the question I want to cover here is, something general, in the writing space again. So what is the hardest thing about, being a poet, in today's world, right? I think for everyone, it's a little bit different, this question and things like that. If you were to ask me, like, what's the hardest part about being an author, I think I would say marketing and, getting your work out there, right? Trying to market work. I think even for, lit magazine journals to, have the work, I see some lit magazine journals use ads, like social media ads, right, to drive traffic, right, to their pages, to things like that. Because sometimes it's hard to, get submissions you need for issues, right? They have to do marketing ads, but I don't like, the whole thing about solicitation and things like that. At most at Dippity, we have, we reach out sometimes to artists, to spotlight because we really love their unique styles and things like that. But that's all, and sometimes we've had those community bonus share sections where we, spotlight different poets in the Instagram community, right? I don't know if we'll continue those bonus sections and stuff like that with our relaunch, but I don't have that charted out at the moment, but we're going to stick to just like our contests and challenges, but we'll see, with the relaunch, how everything goes. Yeah. Anyways, back to that question. So I think the absolutely hardest thing as poets, as writers, is, I mentioned this maybe a couple episodes back, in like the biggest mistakes writers make. That was quite a ways back, that episode. But, it's hard to be vulnerable, to be open, to share, parts of yourself in your writing. I feel like, you don't have to be super personal in your poems and things like that. You can do it in a manner where it's like a bit more abstract, which is cool about poetry, right? Others don't necessarily always know what you're talking about or understand the meaning of some of your lines because, they weren't there with you, right, in that memory clip. So it depends, how you word things, right? So it's really hard being vulnerable. There are some things still today I haven't like written a ton about, myself, I would say, particularly, in my life, something that heavily impacted me was violence. Throughout my life, I was exposed to a lot of violent situations, actually, in my fam. I call them family feud events or family feud fights. And I think those incidents, and it wasn't just like once a month or a week or once in a blue moon, it was like constantly, it took a toll, and as a kid growing up and stuff and throughout, teenagehood, middle school, high school. And I think that made me very, soft-spoken person, you could say, or seized up my personality a little bit because I'm a very, outgoing, chatty person, but I think in public settings and stuff like that, and, I grew to be more quiet, because of that. I think, just being exposed to a lot of yelling, a lot of incidents where others in my family weren't getting along, my grandparents and my parents, always, ending in arguments over the phone and stuff or in person even, and, and all of the foul language and stuff and the just rubbish, nonsense, like others getting upset over the smallest things, really ridiculous, So, and, so I was exposed to a lot of things like that. And, some things that were very tough, some things that make you cry, right? You want others in your family to get along. That's it, right? You just want that. And it was tough over the years. I wrote poems, some of you guys may have read, that, about my parents and, my grandparents really liking my parents, marriage, and things like that. My mom, is African American. She experienced, racism, within our own family, right? It's kind of messed up, everyone's sort of moved on and forgiven sort of for that, I guess, not really. But, it comes up now and then, still till today. Some things that happened in the past, and, it was hard on my mom, she was getting called, I wrote a poem about, like 1960 black names, things like that. She was getting called like really some degrading things in other languages too, yeah, and I could pick up on that, obviously, because I would look up what some of the words meant and stuff like that. And later here, yeah, that's what she was saying, and it's like really upsetting, my grandma in KL and, my grandparents, there was always a lot of quarrels, on both sides. And being an only child, I think that was like really hard for me because I didn't have siblings, and if your parents are fighting, your grandparents are not, not communicating, with peaceful conversations on the phone, and, phone calls end in, FUs or, pardon my language, but, and all of that stuff rather than I love yous, right? It's kind of like, it affects you, and it's like year after year after year, right? And yeah, so we didn't have like a lot of like family get-togethers where everyone's together from both sides of our family ever, like huge gatherings or anything like that. Mostly it's just always ever been, me and my folks, so it was really tough. And on top of that, I was dealing with, a lot of, just exposed to a lot of rubbish events and stuff and violence, so I was very quiet about those things, and my family moved on from all that stuff, but, I was very little at the time when a lot of things happened like that, and it continued on a little bit sometimes, some things came up, things that carried past midnight again, and just bizarre stuff, and it's hard to, get rest and to just relax when things happen like that. It's stressful, right? It makes you question, things, right, in your life, and, yeah. But that's why, again, I think I resorted to writing, drawing, and a lot of my cartoon characters or whatever I did, drawing and stuff, it was usually, to make others smile, or I'd make the cartoon drawing smile, or always, have a very jolly face, you could say, jolly good. I had some cartoon characters that would say that, and sketch art and stuff, and digital art. People, when I was younger, quite a bit of times, said, you should smile more, Jazz, you should smile more. But they didn't realize, at the time, I was literally dealing with something that morning or that day that, caused me to not smile. It's hard to smile right away when you're like recovering from like being exposed to a bunch of yelling or shouting or something, or someone getting upset like in split seconds about something, things like that happen, and it can be hard to focus on things, and to smile like right off the bat after, going through things like that. So, yeah. So, I totally, have read I haven't written a ton about some of, I would say, the darkest moments of my life per se. Some of them I have, and some of them I haven't gotten into around yet, but I was trying to. It's just really hard. I think as poets, it's tough for us to share very personal things, and you don't have to. I mean, if you want to, you should, but, I think a lot of it comes with, poets don't want to, and you can write under a pen name, but, if others know your pen name, then, right, eventually it's going to be known, right? So, a lot of poets don't want to embarrass anyone or, cause shame to their family maybe about certain topics and things. And, privacy is important, but I think it's important that we share messages and lessons through our work and writing, so it doesn't, others can learn from that. And, over the years, I really, was exposed to a lot of things, that I probably should have talked about personally. I probably should have, but I never did. I bottled up a lot of those things, and I was just so quiet because of things happening, in my fam, and, I love my family, no doubt, everyone, again, no family's perfect. We all have ups and downs and, various challenges, but there are, just some things that, never should happen, right? Violence is never the answer. No one in my family has ever hurt me or anything like that. Mostly just words, right? Words hurt us. I've been called, dirty names and things like that, when others get upset, or, foul language, right? I mentioned on this podcast and, earlier, I've been called, A words, B words, F words, M words, C words, all N words, all the words you can think of. And yeah, so it's just pretty messed up, when that happens, when people are calling you false names and just like, yeah. So it's tough, it happens, I think at some point in time, again, all of us in our life, we go through, someone saying something nasty or mean, but it can be hard when it's constant in your life, a trace of that, right? Name calling and others, saying things. And it's not really motivational when you call someone a name or, let's say you outright call someone loser, flop, or failure, right? It's not really motivational to them. I think it's more so it hurts them, right? It's can be hurtful. But I think by focusing on our passions and things we love, we can, take our mind off of rubbish and nonsense things people say. All that matters is who you are and the type of person you are. I think, not everyone's going to, someone in the community or someone had said this, we can't choose our family, right? Or someone had said this, we just, and sometimes, the poetry community is like family to us or friends or we form connections like that. But, I think, we oftentimes we want our family to, like our work, like what we do or to stand by us. And I'm not saying my parents aren't, supportive of things I do, but, it's just hard, some things in the past, I think if some things weren't said, growing up and stuff, I probably wouldn't have taken probably the direction I had, career path wise, into IT necessarily. I probably would have done a different, major or something or a couple of tried different things, I just was like, on the fence constantly about whether to major in something, art, or go to an art academy or something, and I never did. And I think that's something I always think back to, I was always told, go into tech, there's no jobs and other things. And then, it's tough, but I like the major I did and all the classes I did. I learned a lot from that, They were tough times, in community college. I was like, I don't know if I'm going to get through these classes and stuff because I was just like not feeling it, at some point in time. I just felt really bogged down. And then, my grades started slipping a little bit in community college and I was usually on top of all that. It wasn't that my work wasn't quality. It's just like I was submitting in things, a little bit late. And I was just like also working at the time and trying to juggle that. And then eventually, I got my grades back up and, I got a 3.8 in, college and university, when I transitioned into, my 4-year program. And, so, I can relate to poets in the community who said they have been exposed to very violent situations or things like that. There's a poem, by Evan, I apologize for mispronouncing names, Evan Boland, Eavanboland, I can relate to that, and a few other poets who have gone through that, or have witnessed, violence in their life constantly, right? And it was for a long time, in my life personally, and I was never hurt again or anything like that, it was just like constantly mentioned, that fights shouldn't happen in front of your kid, right? Things like that, and things, over the years, and, it was tough for me personally, I never really wrote about, things like that, things that my parents went through, my dad was like abused as a kid, he never really let that go. With his mom and, my mom also was, faced some things too as well. Very, very tough, the things I witnessed as a kid. It just like, it puts you in shock. Sometimes you are frozen, right, as a little kid and you don't know what to do, right, if you're very small at the time, especially. And then as I got older, we stay with our family, right? We try to stay and keep things together, but, it can be tough, But yeah, my family moved on from a lot of really, really tough things and obstacles and hurdles there. It's tough, when you deal with a lot of people who hold grudges and anger issues and just, never let those things go. It can affect your health, and things like that can hurt your heart. I had countless times, I think, when I cried, growing up and stuff, actually. But I was thankfully I had art, right, and writing and things like that. So it's not easy, and you absolutely should discuss things like that and be open about it. And it's hard, for sure. We get flashbacks sometimes, of things like that. Some people never change, right? That's true, and some people do. It does happen. Some people do, but I think, something in my life that never really stopped was the whole name calling thing, and foul language in my family. And I only ever used, like, I don't curse a lot, guys. I'm sure, I always try to give you a heads up if I curse, or not always, but, if someone is, outright saying something about you that's not true, or saying things, right? It can be very hurtful, and sometimes you curse back, or you say, that's not fudging true. I'm saying fudging, guys. I'm trying not to curse a bunch, but and it's hurtful. Or sometimes, there are cases where human beings, they face severe injuries or trauma or memory loss even, and then they have personality changes, right, and things like that. It could be injuries to their brain or neck or things like that, right? Or, let's say from a fall or some accident or something, right, that no one witnessed. And, it creates a chain reaction in your body, right? That's just an example, right? Things happen like that, where, you are a completely different person because of trauma, and suddenly, you're not the same for some brief moments, or it could be a very long time even. And, things like that happen to people, some very rare, weird cases, and I've discuss some things I've witnessed or experienced firsthand in terms of things like that. And so I'm not a person who's big on cursing and things like that, unless someone really is pushing my buttons, or is just like cursing at me. I don't like to curse back or anything like that. But it's when you go into shock or trauma or things like that, sometimes you're not the same, right? So it happens, right? So yeah. Anyways, so just know I can relate to a lot of heavy things, absolutely. There are things that just were super dark in my life, I would say. But I had a lot of really beautiful and cool moments with my family over the years, movie nights, pizza nights, all of that stuff, outings and all of that stuff. It's just like, I think throughout my family, there are a lot of just stupid anger issues and grudges and things others never really let go about their childhood and upbringings and stuff. And, my folks, and, I wrote poems about things that happened. My folks aren't huge fans about the poems, about them or tied to them, because it stirs up old memories and things that happened, And I mean, we don't really, have a lot of visits from family or anything like that, mostly because of things that happened in the past. The others never really let go, Some people do cut off their family members and things like that, and they're still family though, so we still stay in touch now and then. But throughout the years of my life, there were so many just weird, bizarre, strange things, and it's like, why can't everyone just get along? Why are we talking about this over and over and over again, for decades, right? Things that happened in the past. It's like a cycle of just really weird stuff, So violence again is never okay, and it's very painful to experience that in your family or in your life. I haven't written a lot of poems around this topic, and I probably should, actually. It's just hard to, I think, for me personally, to be that, again, it's hard to be vulnerable and open. And I've written totally vulnerable and open poems about other things I've gone through. Some of I've written about medical gaslighting. I've written about other things in the world that irk me, right? Injustice and other things, and, others not listening or believing you, things like that. Some fellow poets in the community can relate to that. But I haven't written a lot about violence, which was a large part of my life, growing up, and I was exposed to that. So, it just, I think, made me a very quiet, soft-spoken person, or appeared to be shy, or even introverted, but I'm not. I'm a very extroverted, outgoing person. I like having fun. I like, meeting new people and talking to people. I really enjoyed that, and throughout my career in IT, talking to people, fixing things, having others walk up at like the tech bar and chatting with them, talking and figuring things out, and working with them, every step of the way to make sure they're back up and running. So, it's tough, when you try to, focus on good things, but, like bad things come up, right? Others get angry, upset, something gets thrown or a hole punch in the wall. I grew up with like hole punches in walls and stuff, things like that, and seeing things fly in the air, all kinds of stuff, guys. So, there's some things I just never forgot, between my parents, my grandparents, it was tough, seeing those things, and I see other grandparents and parents get along, and I was like, I wish that was like my family back then, or now, how it just felt always like a little bit of a divide, constantly, not fully, there, that togetherness, but my parents have always been there for me, they've totally, given me place to stay when I needed it and stuff like that, have, looked out for me and stuff my whole life. But there are times wherein people don't see things you go through trauma-wise or witness or experience, especially if you're only child, right? And it, you sort of feel kind of, strange things happen to people. I'm just going to leave it at that. Very strange things that, sometimes they shouldn't have survived, right? And you're like, OMG, how did that even happen, And, sometimes people don't believe you and they take the wrong course of action, right? That happens. So, I'm just seeing so many strange things in my life, I think, and some very, questioning and puzzling things too. But, so... there was a Lit Magger journal, I think, that focused on domestic violence. I can't remember. I think I stumbled across them a long time back, but I don't know what they were called. I apologize. But they did a really good job. Oh, absolutely. I think they paused. I think they were on a hiatus, or I didn't see any new publications for quite some time, so I don't know if they're back or anything. I don't remember what they're called, though. There are, I'm sure, some other places out there, but yeah. That focus on things like that, but it's a very serious topic and subject matter. I have, a lot of experience with it personally, and it's not something you like can easily tell people, right? Because it's heartbreaking and stuff like that. But again, no one's ever hurt me in my family. I think mainly like words, words have been, kind of very painful, in my family over the years and stuff. And even in some recent years, words and stuff. But, so it's never okay, to see your family members, not get along or to fight or to, it's it hurts your heart, especially, if you're an only child and you don't have a lot of family or a huge network, right? It's tough to put up with that. Usually, I would tune things out with music, draw, right? Watch a flick, or, usually, dessert, stuff like that. A lot of times, after incidents and stuff, there would always be forgiveness, right? Moving on, and so, but, over the years, things got better with my family, I'd say, but, not a lot of, like, contact and stuff, not a lot of, in-person contact and stuff. I mean, like, between my grandparents and stuff, and, they got older and stuff, and they can't travel for health reasons, but back then, a lot of incidents happened that definitely shouldn't have and could have been avoided for sure, So, I haven't written a whole lot of, violence-related poems and things like that, because I think it's it takes time, to get those things out, and, and to write about it in a way, it's tough, to write things that happened, in your family, or to share those things, personal. There's like memoir-styled poetry, right, and things like that. But I think, poems about memories and things like that, right? And it's tough, writing about flashbacks and things that actually happened to you, but you can do so in a way where it's not necessarily always, outright saying, exactly, what happened. Sometimes you can communicate messages, in different ways, right? You don't have to, you can leave out names and stuff like that from time to time, even in short stories, right? But so I just wanted to share that. So I think for me, the hardest thing about being a poet or writer is like, writing about some topics, right, that are make you very vulnerable, raw, and things like that. I've always been a very, it's not hard for me to write about topics a lot. Sometimes I do have like writer's block, but that's mostly because I think, sometimes there's just so many things happening at once that you try to just get a calm peace moment, right? And you're trying to focus and just let go, right? When we overthink things, oftentimes it's hard for us to put things down on paper and stuff. So, yeah. Being vulnerable, I think, is like a really hard thing for a lot of poets, especially poets starting out, it's scary, right, to share your work, to get it out there, to submit to lit magazine journals, On the flip side, I mentioned this, right, a lot of editors, readers even know what it's like, right, to submit your work and vice versa, right? They know what it feels like to get a rejection or decline or for your work not to move forward. So, for the most part, I know tons in the lit mag community. They're very careful of others' work. They read it thoroughly, right? And, But again, some topics and some lit magazine journals aren't going to, accept poetry tied to that at all, right? Some themes or topics, right? They have focuses, right? So you have to be mindful about that, just because they reject it doesn't mean they don't care, about the subject matter or anything like that. Just isn't a fit for their particular journal or magazine issue, at the time. So I just want to take the time to share that. So, I had a poem accepted through Diacritics or, Divan, and I think that's how you pronounce it, Diacritics, or I apologize, I'm mispronouncing things. But, and it was, what year was that? I should look it up because my memory is a bit fuzzy right now. I think it was a while back. It was, let's see. I'm looking it up for you guys. But yeah, that was the first poem I ever got paid for, like $50. I have a, Southeast Asian and roots too. And my mom's African American. And then I also have, I was told I also have, Native American roots a little bit. But predominantly, Southeast Asian, African American, and Punjabi. But yeah, over the years, I got some gifts, and stuff like that. But I think I was more so exposed to a lot of, Indian culture, Bollywood movies, Bollywood music, and stuff like that. And then, I listened to rap music over the years, totally pop, hip hop, all kinds of music. I love all kinds. And there's so many cool artists in the world for sure. Let me see if I can find it for you guys, I think it's here. I have it bookmarked. I just have to go out to this page. And I was going to my Chill Subs profile of all things, right? So let's see. Let's see if I can... I clicked on something else, guys. I apologize. So, yeah, here. Here we go. Okay, I found it. So, yeah, March 15th, 2023. So, yeah, I wrote a poem called False Tooth Picture. And that was just, like, indicative of, like, you may be... I was thinking back to a photo where I was smiling with my parents and my grandparents, and we were all seated in a chair when I was, like, 11, and I was, taking a visit, to see my grandparents around, like, Christmas time and stuff. And they got me, like, some cool gifts, they got me a Lemony Snicket book, like the last book in the series that I really wanted to read, and, they signed it and put a very cool bookmark in it. I used to be gifted a lot of books, from my grandpa and grandparents and stuff and other things. It's not like they weren't supportive or, anything like that. It's just like there was a lot of division, a lot of like, I used to not, initiate phone calls and stuff because it would always end in, my parents getting upset or things like that. And, yeah. So, family quarrels, they're never fun. So I sort of minimized contact because of, all the quarrels and stuff nonstop. And it was just a lot, So False Tooth Picture, March 15th, 2023, that was the first poem I ever got paid for. It was like $50. And yeah, so they focus on it says Diasporic Vietnamese Artist Network, but they also accept work from, those who have ties to, Southeast Asia, or, and they have a few other, I think, programs and things that they do. And yeah, on their site, I haven't gone on there in quite some time. But yeah, so I wrote about how, it was a great memory, but also a sad memory for me, because it wasn't free of like, shouting, yelling, a family fight, something breaking and things like that, right? So, it's not easy, my parents, they've been together for like, 40 plus years, and, they had a lot of ups and downs, but they always stayed by each other through the tough times. And, they overcame a lot of things, and forgave, and, all of that stuff. And, no doubt, I still love my grandparents, my parents, although all those things happened in the past, yeah, I think I probably would have addressed things differently, the moment I turned 18 and things like that. Maybe I would have removed myself more so from those, from just things in general, and take time to have my own personal space, and place away maybe from all those things, but I tried to be there, and just like tune it out and stuff, and to, it's tough, the things happening in your fam where, it starts off rocky, right? And, not everyone has the same, exact, family memories, right? We all have different family memories, upbringings, and things like that. And I think those are, some of us have darker ones, right? Absolutely. Things that we go through. Yeah. So for me as a poet, as a writer, I think to, share things and tidbits like that, it takes time, if you want to gradually do that, but you don't have to. You can keep your work to yourself. You can keep a private diary or journal, or you can share it out, under a pen name. It's totally up to you. But I think it's important to share things you've overcame or gone through message-wise, and the importance of, learning what's appropriate, how a family should act, how a family should behave, things like that, free of violence, free of any, things like that, and, I was around, a lot of people in my family would just get sensitive and upset in a heartbeat, like Hulk tempers I constantly use in some of my work, things like that, and it can be very hurtful, you just like, it made me very, very quiet again, my whole life, I think, for quite some time. And then, I think, by getting into the workforce a little bit, I started, opening up a little bit every year, and it really helped me. Yeah. And writing and art, of course. But yeah, and doing podcasting as well, too. I think that was, something I never thought I'd do, podcast shows and stuff. And yeah, it's a lot of fun to do podcasts too, and to share things. So yeah, I just wanted to take the time to do that. Again, as authors, I feel like, there are so many challenges and hard things of being an author, even with a poet, right? I was mentioning one thing that I felt was hard, but for you as a poet, it could be something else, right? It could be, struggling to find things to write about, and again, if you think about that, or you're having problems with that, I mentioned again, lean on your personal experiences, or things you've seen, or, or witnessed or experienced, right? Or things that inspire you, or you can do those writing prompt challenges too. Just like, credit anyone if you do, like, again, after poems or inspo poems or things like that, provide appropriate credit always. So, yeah, that's all I wanted to share on this podcast. Basically, I feel like as, I was continuing what I was saying about authors. So, marketing, right? Marketing can be expensive. It's very hard. I don't know if I'll do an episode on how to market your work as a writer or poet or artist, some lit magazine journals go out their way to do additional promotion around, poets' work, right? They do collab posts. They do or joint posts. They do social media, shares. At Dippity Lit Mag, we often do podcast shares and things like that. And a few other things, in our issues in the past that we've done, and things like that. And I've from time to time have done some. When Dippity Lit Mag started originally, I used to make these cool squares on Polaroids that others really liked, and it would have poetry from, usually if they were on Instagram or a poet in the community too. I would take excerpts of their poems and incorporate into the Polaroid squares, and it would have their photo. Sometimes they would have spoken word with them, speaking. And then I'd do some video clip editing and things like that. Some of the poets were also musicians, so I incorporated their music or song, and tried to have it follow very closely with the lyrics or their poem or what it was about or the subject matter. And yeah, those were a lot of fun. I didn't really have a name for them. I guess they're like Polaroid square, spotlights. I have I used to do a lot of those, quite a few for poets in the community that had, I felt really impacted by their work, I'd say, or had followed them fairly closely, and they were supportive of Dippity Lit Mag and, the projects and everything. And some very awesome poets in the community, very supportive. So I would say, if you have a topic you want to write about, think about it this way, there are probably someone out there in the world who has gone through something similar as you, not exactly, obviously, but some things, right, that are heavier in nature to write about. And it may help you to read other poets' work on those topics for you to feel more comfortable with writing about that yourself or getting out there and submitting to lit mags and journals. And you can ease into it. You don't have to necessarily, again, share every bit of your life. If it makes you feel uncomfortable or you feel, privacy concerns or things like that, or scared, don't do it, unless you're ready, again, something that helped me ease into things was like, I started writing back up again, through, partaking in the Instagram poetry community. Prior to that, I was in online communities under, usernames or pen names and stuff. So you just got to, or my pen name and usernames. So you just got to see what works for you, and test the waters. And if you want to get, dabble in poetry or become a self-published author or start your own lit mag journal, it's totally up to you what you want to do. And the focus of your lit mag journal, again, if you want to create a lit mag journal around, let's say domestic violence or awareness or raising awareness on just one topic, their environmental impact, lit mags and journals, again, they're ones that focus on nothing but horror, or sea poetry. I've seen that, or some things related to, the elements, and nature. So many cool themes and focuses, again, in the lit mag world and communities. So if you don't see a lit mag journal or a lot of lit mags and journals on a particular subject matter or something that's really important to you, or see a gap, create one around that. I think that's cool to do. So I think, again, lit mags and journals create more light. They help us, bring more sunshine into the world, and we need that more than ever. There are very, you could say, dark times happening in the world still every single year, so I think the writing community and everything, as writing art, totally has like helped others, get through their day, music even, so even if you're not a writer or an artist, everyone has something that they love that, perhaps gets them through the day. It could be something as small as, reading a book or, listening to their favorite song on repeat. Everyone has something that they do to overcome something very challenging or, in their life, or, just like, getting through the year every week or month. Everyone has something that they do, like a hobby or something they're passionate about or do quite a bit, outside of their, could be 9 to 5, right? So, so I think I just wanted to take the time to share this. Not a lot of people know that I had, or barely anyone knows, I had gone through, a lot of violence in my life personally over the years as a kid and growing up, and that was like the predominant reason why I was so quiet, I would say. It just, I just, it took me a while, to really, go through that, and to, it's hard. We oftentimes have flashbacks and memories from our childhood, teenagehood, and some things in our adulthood that happen from time to time. Those types of incidents, they stick with us, our whole life. People can say move on and just, move on and forget it, but it's hard, because we have memories locked in our mind, right? And, it's some things are rather painful and, and hurt our heart. So, it's important to, totally, to take care of yourself, to do what you love, and to, create a positive impact with your work and writing, it's so important, to share. So that's all. P.S. guys. So yeah, I think with a lot of pressures in my life, I was, an only child. I think I just ended up, I was exposed to, a lot of good things too. My parents, had me, take violin classes, but I didn't really like it a whole bunch, I'd say. It was tough. I think the only instrument I ever really liked was trombone. I did a solo actually with it. I was first chair. So that was pretty cool, in fifth grade. And, I probably should have continued trombone instead in middle school instead of clarinet and flute, and other things. Bassoon, I wasn't too bad at grasping. And I tried guitar briefly. My dad bought me a guitar once and I tried, but I never really picked it up. But, so, I took, Shotokan, cry classes. My parents wanted me to be tough, my dad and stuff. And, but I only made it up to green belt. I ended up, not completing that because I wanted more time to focus on my classes and stuff. It was after school and stuff. And I did, some like dance classes as well growing up, some dance performances. And, it was called Bharatanatyam. It's super long to pronounce. And it's like basically a dance style derived from India, And, so, I always, tried new things for sure, and I was, open to that. But I think I pushed aside a lot of things I really wanted to do, like I actually like tap dancing and stuff like that, and fencing and things like that. And, I do love chess. The chess tournaments were always a lot of fun growing up and stuff. But, I did a lot of outlets, from young, my parents had me do. And, so, it wasn't all bad memories or anything like that. But there was a lot of tough times in my life, where I felt like, just like, it's like, why is this happening, and things like that. We have those things in our life that are just like question marks that, are quite heavy, especially when it comes to, violent incidents and things in our childhood or upbringing. And, things like that, that we witness. And it's just pretty painful, Again, we just want, our family to get along. We just want a happy family, right? Everyone wants that. We never want to see anyone unhappy or, angry all the time. It affects us, So, yeah. Anyways, I was just sharing, this podcast is like an audio diary for me as an editor, a writer, artist, person, in general. So, yeah. Take care, guys. Oh, but wait, guys, just one more thing. I know, I keep going on and on, but I want to say also something that's also pretty tough to deal with, I think. A lot of poets, are perhaps you could say looked down upon, right? They're not taken seriously, right, about their work, their writing, and, for instance, I know quite a few poets in the community have written, poetry around, what it means to be, an Instagram poet, people, totally have dissed others who started on Instagram. I didn't, but, a lot of awesome poets, and writers or creators started sharing their work on Instagram, and that's not a bad thing. We all have a starting point, a place that we share our work and grow and build connections and network, and yeah, I think it's it's tough, when people, sometimes people gill and say, oh, you're a poet, haha, where are you a bestseller, or are you, do you have hundreds of thousands of followers, and, people take it very lightly as a joke, unless you're earning a lot from it, or well known. I think that's kind of messed up, and, the whole reason behind poetry and writing, we all have our reasons for, sharing. And sometimes we want to share memories, moments in our life, or messages, or meaningful things, or raise awareness about topics, or to express ourselves, right? I think everyone, again, has something that they love and does in the world, right? Whether it be a hobby or something they're passionate about. And, to diss poetry or to diss that, and say it's, and to laugh at it or belittle someone, it's like, how would someone feel if someone belittled, someone, aspiring to be a soccer player or, a track runner or something at any age or something, I think it's very disrespectful for others to look down upon poets or, things like that, So I'm just saying that is also, in addition to that, being vulnerable and honest, I think, it comes with the fact that we worry, again, as I mentioned in this podcast, how others perceive us, right, in the world. And you have to remain tough, right? And it's hard, but I think sometimes we eventually in our lives, we find community, maybe we find some good friends, and who stand by us. And I think that's great. Not everyone is fortunate enough to, have a large network of friends or a strong support network, perhaps in their family or friends wise, so I think, it's absolutely important that everyone has something, that grounds them to something they're very passionate about, or, a purpose. And yeah.